Today we're going to be covering the best and worst pet reptile that you could actually own. Lucy's definitely a 20-foot reticulated python. Oh my God. And she could be a handful at times. The fact is reticulated pythons are a giant snake. And if you're not really experienced and you have one with a bad attitude like this, probably a bad idea as a pet. Now, obviously, if you have your heart set on a reticulated python, there are some responsible ways to actually own a reticulated python. Although I always think that it's something that you should get when you already have some experience with some other snakes. But obviously, an animal like Perdita here, a cow reticulated python, is an option that actually could work. There's mainland retics like Lucy that get 20+ foot. And then there's animals that are insular islands that are a little bit smaller. Cow reticulated pythons rarely exceed 12 to 14 foot. So they're a little bit more manageable animal. And then you have to remember, there's some islands that are dwarfs that literally only get like 6 or 7 foot. So if you want a retic, you can still get a retic, but you just have to make sure you're getting the right retic, because a 20-foot, potentially angry reticulated python, probably not a great option. And of course, this is a piebald ball python named Honey, probably the best starter snake that you can possibly have. Everyone knows ball pythons are amazing. They're just such great animals. They get big enough to be impressive, but they're not so big like they're difficult to care for, like a reticulated python. Plus, they're captive bred and they come in a ton of different colors. Like the albino ball python, my girl Helen here, you typically only have to feed them once every 7 to 10 days. They really don't go to the bathroom that often, so cleaning is really easy. So if you're interested in an entry-level snake, like you've never owned a snake before, a good captive bred ball python is definitely one of the best choices. And now there are so many different colors that you can choose from, and most of them are pretty cost effective.
He's helping me clean filter.
This, of course, is Elvis, the Asian water monitor, one of the biggest monitors on the planet. Certainly in the top 3 when it comes to species. They are incredible. They are intelligent. They are amazing. Definitely one of the coolest animals I've ever owned in my entire life. But you gotta remember, it takes a giant cage. It's got an 8-foot by 6-foot cage. When we expand, he's gonna get into an even larger enclosure. These guys are super intelligent. They need lots of room to roam around. So it's very difficult to keep a giant monitor lizard. Don't get me wrong. If you have the ability and you have the knowledge, they are amazing. I can't think of a cooler animal than a water monitor. Well, maybe a Komodo dragon, but that's something that hopefully one day I'll get a chance to work with. Water monitors are amazing, but let's face it, if you're just getting into reptiles, water monitors may not be your choice. And obviously, Asian water monitors aren't the only giant monitor lizards out there. There's a whole bunch of really big monitor lizards. Look at the black-throat monitor. I mean, one of the coolest, most impressive animals that I keep. And these guys are typically pretty puppy dog tame, like the Asian water monitors. Again, you can have amazing relationships with the animals, but look at these claws right here. Just look at those talons. Oh my gosh. You don't have experience and you're working with an animal like this, maybe not the best choice. Now, there's a number of species of monitor lizards that stay much smaller, like the red Aki monitor's cherry pop here. And that's really a great way to start. Instead of going into an Asian water monitor or white throat monitor or croc monitor, don't get me wrong, they're amazing animals. Maybe start with something on the small side. These dwarf monitors, they have the same kind of intelligence and the same care as the large monitor. So you can get your feet wet in this, spend a year or so learning how to take care of an Aki monitor or some other dwarf monitor species, and then slowly work your way up. I mean, maybe the next progression will be a savanna monitor that gets big but not as big, and then ultimately you can work your way up to something like a croc monitor. I think that Aki monitors make absolutely wonderful pets and are a great way to get started in monitor lizards. You know, we all fall in love with alligators, right? See things like Salt here, the albino alligator, and you think, wow, what an amazing animal. I would love to own an alligator one day. It is truly incredible. I mean, they are insanely cool animals, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I am 100% against pet alligators, because 99.999% of pet alligators are really cool when they're babies, and maybe even when they're the size of Salt. But once they get 5-6 foot, there's nowhere to go, right? And people have them and they don't know what to do with them. And you're gonna run into problems. Listen, crocodilians aren't pets. Even dwarf caiman, they don't get quite as big, but they're usually very difficult to take care of, very athletic, and a bite from one of those is going to send you to the hospital. Listen, I love crocodilians, and I run a reptile zoo, and of course I'm going to keep them. But if I didn't have a reptile zoo and I didn't have a reptile facility, I wouldn't have a pet alligator, to be totally honest with you. Salt and Pepper are getting a 20-foot long by 10-foot wide enclosure. That's a tremendous amount of space. I mean, that's almost the size of an apartment at some point. So you have to have a lot of space, time, and dedication. So please do me a favor, don't get an alligator as a pet.
Yeah, no one should keep alligators except for Dad. Right, Mike?
What? Listen, I know there is a huge difference between an alligator and a bearded dragon. I get it. If you're like, I want an alligator, you're probably not thinking, maybe I'll get a bearded dragon instead. But I'm telling you, bearded dragons are amazing. I always say a few really great pet lizards to keep when you're first starting is either a bearded dragon, a crested gecko, or a leopard gecko. Tons of information out there. They're only captive bred in the US, so you're getting a really good quality animal, and they're really pretty easy to care for. And as you can see, they make absolutely unbelievable companions. I mean, you can literally throw this guy on your shoulder. You could do your schoolwork. You could watch your TV show with it, whatever the case may be. Bearded dragons, great. Alligators, not so much. Anacondas, green anacondas in particular. You guys know it, my favorite snake on the planet. Of course, we've got my girl Verde here. We've got Ariana hanging out over here. Hi, Ariana. They're so inquisitive. She sees me come up and she's like, what's going on? And of course, we've got my girl Ivy that's just starting to go into shed. She's in the water, so we're gonna leave her alone. All three of my anacondas are absolutely amazing. Well, all the babies are really great too. But hey, let's face it, anacondas as a pet, probably not the best idea, right? Because of two things. Number one, they get absolutely ginormous. Males stay a little bit smaller and could potentially be okay, but females get huge. I mean, they can get 18, 20 foot long and 200, maybe even 300 pounds. Where are you going to keep something like that? The other thing is that you eventually need a huge water basin because these guys are water animals. Where is Ivy? Where is Ariana? In the water. Verde loves to stay in the water as well. She's going to actually eventually move into this enclosure when Ivy goes across the street into a much larger enclosure with even more water. So it's really impractical for most people to keep these guys. This is like a $30,000, $35,000 enclosure. Most people don't have $30,000 or $35,000 to spend on an enclosure to keep an anaconda properly. So as much as I love anacondas being my #1 favorite snake on the planet, I definitely would say bad pet option.
Mr. Brian, you didn't even mention how much they pee and poop. I clean this thing every single day. We had to clean it this morning. Twice.
Now, this is a big juxtaposition. I realize that going from an anaconda to Midnight, the Mexican black king snake. This is a Mexican black king snake that's about 6 months old, only gonna get about 4 foot, maybe about this big around. A really handleable snake. Definitely a better option than a big green anaconda. And there are a whole bunch of king snakes and milk snake that you can choose from. I mean, this is Luna. This is a high white albino black and white California king snake that's about a year old. Look at how placid it is. Look at how easy it is. I mean, this is an animal that as a full grown adult is gonna go in maybe a 40-gallon aquarium as opposed to something that is going to take up hundreds of square foot of your house. So king snakes, milk snakes make a great starter pet as well. Again, we talked about ball pythons earlier. King snakes are cool and they come in so many different colors and flavors. You can really choose exactly what you want. This is actually a nosy bee panther chameleon, and they are absolutely wonderful. I mean, iconic, right? I mean, everyone knows a chameleon. They've got those cool eyes. They've got those zygodactylous feet. They have a prehensile tail. They've got the long, sticky tongue. I mean, what a great animal. The problem is you have to have a setup that is really good. If you have the wrong setup for a chameleon, you are going to fail at keeping them. The good news is that there's tons of captive bred panther chameleons, veiled chameleons, other chameleons that do really, really well in captivity. So if you have the right environment, it can be really good. Do I think they're a starter pet? Unfortunately, no, because they are a little bit difficult. And if you get one and you don't know the warning signs of a potential problem, they perish really quickly. I mean, they can go from super healthy like this one right here to literally perishing within a week if they're not being taken care of. So I personally don't think chameleons are a great starter pet. Although I don't want to discourage you. Once you get some experience, they are absolutely fantastic. I think a way better option if you want to get into something that's really still exotic, looks really cool, but is easier to keep are the New Caledonian geckos, or at least some of them, like the gargoyle geckos here, are really good. They come in a tremendous amount of colors. You can get gray ones, you can get these tanner ones, you can get a little bit of orange, you can get solid red, you can get really amazing animals, and they're very, very easy to care for. The thing that's great about New Caledonian geckos is they don't need a heat source, so you can keep in your house without having a bunch of expensive lights, and they feed on a powdered type of food that you mix with water that is super easy to keep. So if you want to avoid, again, all those live bugs, you can get New Caledonia geckos, and they are amazing. And there's so many to choose from, like these Chihuahua geckos. And even if you want to get something as exotic as a lychee gecko, I mean, you look at these guys, and years past they were super hard to get, and now they're actually relatively available, and they're not that terribly expensive, and they're the same care as a Chihuahua or a crested or a gargoyle gecko, but they get gigantic, and they are so impressive. I mean, these are like little miniature dinosaurs. I love them to death. So when you think about something as exotic as a lychee gecko, don't think that that's out of your range. Don't think that that's out of your range to actually get, because they actually are pretty easy to care for, especially if you get a nice, well-started captive animal. Lychees are freaking awesome. And don't forget they're And then there's, of course, boa constrictors, one of the most iconic snakes. Everyone knows a boa constrictor, and it happened to be one of my first snakes that I ever got, and they can make really great pets. I mean, this animal is absolutely placid. Look at how beautiful they come in a ton of different colors, which means that you can choose exactly what you want. But the problem is they do get pretty big. Like Cupcake here, I mean, this is a big snake. When you're first starting out with snakes, you want to start with something that is this size or could potentially get this size. And let me tell you another thing about them. They are strong. Pound for pound, boa constrictors are the strongest snake on the planet. These guys have unbelievable muscles. When you're holding a Burmese python the same size, it's like nothing compared to the squeeze that a boa constrictor can give you. Now again, it's not a dangerous thing. They're not going to kill you, but it's something that you have to be aware of, because when you're struggling with an animal of this size, it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to do if you don't have some experience behind them. So I think boas are amazing, but I would call these an intermediate pet, not a beginner pet. Beginners should stick with things like corn snakes, something that's going to be more modest, easier to care for. This is a full-grown adult corn snake named Maisie. Absolutely wonderful, cool pet snake, really easy to care for. I used to always say the best two starter snakes are actually ball pythons and corn snakes. Ball pythons are amazing. We talked about them earlier, but they're a little bit more mellow, right? They just kind of sit there. Some people even call them the pet rock of the snake world.
Pet rock.
Whereas the corn snakes are much more active. They'll move around and kind of interact more. So it really depends on what you want. If you want something that's going to sit and chill and watch TV with you, a ball python's a great way to go. If you want something that's going to interact, climb around, and be kind of more active, even when you look in the enclosure, it's more active and moving around, corn snakes are definitely the choice for you. Can't get much more iconic than the green iguana. Of course, this is an albino. Back in the day when reptiles were just getting going, everyone had a pet iguana. Right? When you went into a pet shop, they didn't have other lizards, but they had green iguanas. And still to this day, you can find green iguanas relatively cheap, and they're kind of all over the place. The problem is that they get pretty big. French's here is still only about 3/4 grown. She's going to get much, much larger. And the problem is, as you know with my stitches, sometimes iguanas aren't exactly the easiest animal to keep. They're super cute when they're babies. When they grow up and they start to get mature and all those hormones are growing, they start to get territorial, they get temperamental, and they typically aren't good pets. So when I think of an iguana, leave that iguana where it's at, because 90% of people that get iguanas in 2 or 3 years can't keep them. Look what happened down in South Florida. We don't want that happening anywhere else. Now, another iconic lizard, of course, would be the leopard gecko. I mean, these guys are everywhere. So many captive bred animals, so many different colors and mutations that makes them actually incredible. And these guys are way easier to keep than an iguana, and they only say about this size, so you can keep them anywhere. Kids, this is a great pet for you. And as adults, it's also cool to get into kind of cool color mutations. So there's kind of something for everyone when it comes to leopard geckos. Like my first pet ever, leopard gecko, absolutely, they do wonderful. But if you've been keeping reptiles for 25 years, you still want something that gives you a challenge to maybe produce something really cool or work with some really cool mutation, I mean, they are the cutest little faces in the world. Leopard geckos are definitely a plus. The tree monitors, I mean, gosh, they are absolutely beautiful. Prehistoric color. You've got green ones like the Bursina, you've got yellows, you've got black ones, you've got blue ones like the McCory. They're absolutely crazy beautiful. The problem is that these guys are more of a display animal, right? Number one, they don't like to be handled. When you do take them out, they've got razor sharp claws. They're gonna rip you apart. You're gonna be all shredded up. And like I said, they actually don't even like coming out. Great display animals. I mean, I stand in front of this enclosure all the time and just stare at how beautiful these guys are. Are they a good pet? I would say not so much. Now on the flip side, something like a blue-tongued skink is a great option because they're super easy to care for. Probably one of the easiest lizards that I've ever cared for. They are super docile. I mean, this particular one is a rare one. Of course, this is a Centralian. You don't find these around. There's only a handful. All blue-tongued skinks are still really great. I prefer all the Australian ones over the Indonesian ones. The Indonesian ones can be a little bit more temperamental, don't seem to like to be handled quite as much, and those are the more readily available ones. But now there's so many being produced in captivity of Australian versions, like the Northerns and the Easterns, and they've come down in price where they're not that much more than the Indonesian ones, and you're getting a much, much better animal. A blue-tongued skink, absolutely incredible. As a matter of fact, in Australia, when you go into a pet shop and someone asks, like, hey, I want my kid to get his first lizard, they almost always say blue-tongued skink, even over bearded dragon, believe it or not. So blue-tongued skinks are a definite yes. Tree monitors, not so much. Oh, Speedy. Do I love my Speedy, the sulcata tortoise. There's probably no more popular tortoise than a sulcata tortoise. They're so cute when they're babies, and they're produced in ginormous numbers, and they're relatively cheap. I think you can buy a sulcata for like 70 bucks or something like that. And this size, they're so amazing. Now, Speedy's about 10 years old, so he's not huge for a 10-year-old. They can get much bigger. Speedy, as an adult, when he's 20, 25, is going to be about this big. And the thing is, they're very destructive. Speedy isn't too bad. He actually will destroy a bunch of things, but he won't go through walls. I actually know people that have kept giant tortoises. They've clawed right through a drywall wall and just destroyed it. But the fact is that although these guys are super cute as babies, they're really not good pets. I actually think sulcata may be the worst pet tortoises that you can ever get, to be honest with you. And I mean no disrespect for all you people that love African spur-thighed tortoises. Listen, I love my Speedy. I would never get rid of him. I hope he's going to be with me his entire life. Well, actually, he'll outlive me. So that's the other problem with tortoises, right? That they typically outlive you. You're going to be giving it away to your children or grandchildren at one point. But I think a better option is something like a redfoot tortoise, a Russian tortoise, a Greek tortoise, something that's going to stay small, right? This is basically about full grown for a redfoot tortoise. This is certainly obtainable to keep, and they're not destructive. They're not going to go through walls. If you do want to walk around, the worst they're going to do is maybe chew on your rug. They're not going to destroy your house. So if you want a tortoise, I would definitely stay with a tortoise that is going to be more easy to care for. Sulcatas are the easiest animal to get, but I think one of the worst ones, and that's why when you go to reptile rescue, say in Arizona, they have hundreds and hundreds of sulcatas from people that are just shipping them to because they can't keep them anymore. And that's the biggest thing about reptiles and what this video is about. Getting the right animal for you so that one day down the road you aren't regretting your decision saying, I can't take care of that animal anymore. So make sure you choose the right animal, not only for today, but for the rest of its life. I hope we helped you figure out what animal is right for you. Speaking of, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, there's a playlist that you can watch all kinds of videos. You can also hit that subscription button. It would mean a lot to me. Also, hit that like button while you're down there. Have a wonderful day, Reptile Army. Remember,
Pet rock.